My father-in-law fired me from the company I sacrificed 15 years of my life for. He said it was time to employ someone who was cut for the job, so he replaced me with my wife's younger sister. I left without a word, but few months later, they needed me. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today's special shout-out goes to Daniel Chapman from Atlanta. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. He didn't even look me in the eye when he fired me. That was the first blow, quiet, almost forgettable, except it cut in a way that made my stomach tighten for weeks after. I'd worked there 15 years. Started at the bottom out of respect, even though I married his daughter, even though I had a degree he didn't. That morning, he called me into his office with the same detached tone he used when he told the landscaper to cut back the roses. "Let's sit for a moment," he said, as if he were doing me a favor. His fingers drummed the edge of the desk, that same rhythm he used when he was waiting for someone to admit guilt. But I hadn't done anything wrong. I knew it. And still, I sat like a schoolboy about to be scolded. "You've given a lot to this company," he said, staring out the window. My chair creaked beneath me. I nodded, waiting for the usual backhanded compliment, the classic, but. He kept going, calm as ever. "But the business is evolving. We need someone who sees things more aggressively, more decisively." His gaze flicked to the side, not quite meeting mine. "It's time to let someone else step in. Someone more, cut for the job." That's when I knew. Not from the words, but from the way he said someone. It already had a face, a name, and I was no longer it. He didn't offer severance. Didn't even let me finish the week. Said it would be cleaner this way. I packed my office in silence. Every framed photo of our corporate retreats, every pen with our family name on it suddenly hollow. My hands moved like they belonged to someone else. My wife's sister, Rebecca, watched me from across the hall. She didn't flinch when I looked at her. Didn't blink. Just sipped her oat milk latte like she hadn't just been handed my entire life's work on a silver platter. She'd started showing up at the company a few months earlier. Nothing official, just shadowing. Learning the ropes, she'd say, though she never made it past noon. She didn't need to. She had the last name. She had the grin. And she had his blessing. When I got home that night, my wife was folding laundry on the bed like nothing had changed. I stood in the doorway, unsure of how to tell her. But she already knew. Her eyes flicked up when I came in, then back to the shirts. "Dad told me what happened," she said, folding one sleeve over the other. "Not our father. Just Dad." No anger, no confusion. Just a statement. I waited for a question, for disbelief, for something that sounded like loyalty. But it didn't come. "Maybe it's for the best," she added after a while, almost to herself. "You've seemed tired." And that was the second blow. No rage, no fight, just that soft dismissal. As if I'd simply been a placeholder all these years. A loyal worker. A loyal husband. Easy to erase. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay on my back, eyes open, listening to the steady sound of her breathing. I wondered if she was pretending, or if peace came that easily to someone who didn't lose anything. I thought about the long nights at the office, the deadlines I bled over, the times I missed holidays because her father needed me to present. I thought about the jokes at my expense, the subtle ones, said with a laugh that required me to join in or seem too sensitive. "You're like a golden retriever," he'd once said at a Christmas party. Loyal, hardworking, not exactly a killer. Everyone laughed. Even me. God, I'd laughed. I spent the next day staring at the boxes I hadn't unpacked. They sat in the trunk of my car, like evidence. I kept thinking someone would call, that there'd been a mistake. Then my wife would storm in and say, "What the hell is wrong with them?" But no one did. And she didn't. Around lunchtime, Rebecca posted a photo on LinkedIn. Excited to step into a new role at the family business. The caption read. Her smile looked like it had been rehearsed in the mirror. My name wasn't mentioned. 15 years erased with one line of white space. I tried to be civil. I told myself anger was useless. That resentment would only make me bitter. I said the things people say when they don't want to become a story others shake their heads at. But every time I looked at the desk calendar they gave me on my 10th anniversary, engraved with my initials, one corner chipped from years of moving it office to office, I felt something dark press behind my ribs. Not rage. Not yet. Just pressure. Just the sense that something had been taken from me without ceremony, and I was expected to smile about it. That weekend, we went to dinner with her parents. I didn't want to. My wife insisted. "It'll be weird if we don't go," she said, applying lipstick in the mirror. "Just act normal." Her father hugged me like we were still good, poured me a drink, asked about the garden. Rebecca sat at the end of the table, talking numbers like she'd always belonged there. Every word she said had my fingerprints on it, strategies I taught her, systems I built. But she didn't look at me once. Not when she toasted to fresh starts. Not when she thanked Dad for believing in her. And still, I nodded. I chewed my steak. I smiled when I was supposed to, because that's what they expected. But that night, in the dark, as I sat alone in the garage staring at the old company mugs I couldn't bring myself to throw away, something clicked. I wasn't angry because I lost the job. I was angry because I let them believe I never really belonged there to begin with. Because I spent 15 years asking for a seat at a table that was always going to be pulled out from under me the second they no longer needed my silence. And silence, I decided, was the last thing they'd get from me again. I stopped going to the family dinners first. That was the easiest cut, clean, impersonal. My wife gave a soft protest the first week, said it would look suspicious. I told her I had a headache. The second week, I didn't bother with a reason. She still went, and when she came back, she didn't tell me what they said. I stopped asking. It was easier that way. The silence grew between us like damp in the walls, slow, invisible at first, then suddenly everywhere. We talked about groceries. The thermostat. Nothing that bled. She filled the space I left at the table with folded napkins, as if pretending someone was still there might hold off the rot. I pulled back from everything else next, group chats, alumni boards, the fantasy football league I started at the office. My phone stopped buzzing by the end of the month. The world didn't miss me. It absorbed the absence like water on concrete. No ripple, no trace. At first, I told myself I needed the quiet, that I was healing. But in truth, I was listening. Listening for how quickly life moves on when you're no longer useful. They replaced me so fast I could still smell my cologne on the office chair. They handed over my logins, my accounts, the years I spent automating the company's back-end infrastructure like I'd never been more than a temp. Rebecca even recycled one of my signature phrases in a press release, word for word. She got applause for it. I nearly vomited. My days became ghost thin. I'd wake up when the house emptied, make black coffee, sit in the same chair for hours watching the light shift across the floor. Some days, I didn't speak until evening. There's a particular kind of silence when you're not just alone, but forgotten. I stopped shaving, let my beard come in like smoke. I started taking walks late at night, when no one would see me, when the houses were dark and the streets whispered instead of spoke. It wasn't depression. Not exactly. It was observation. I was cataloging, watching how it all crumbled without me, how they filled the gaps I left with plaster and pretense. About 2 months after I vanished from their world, a recruiter called, said he'd seen my work, asked if I'd be interested in a leadership role elsewhere. I declined. I wasn't ready to build someone else's empire. Not again. Not for someone who'd pat me on the head and feed me equity like scraps. I hung up and stared at the blinking voicemail light for a long time. The blinking reminded me of a heartbeat. Faint, persistent, still alive. That night, I drove past my old office building. I parked across the street, headlights off, and just watched. Rebecca was still there, her car, parked right in the front like royalty. She must have stayed late, or maybe wanted to be seen staying late. The lobby lights glowed like aquarium glass. I used to stay late, too. Not for show, but because no one else could get the damn quarterly reports to generate without crashing the system. I watched her walk out, heels clicking, scrolling her phone. She didn't look up once. That used to be my exit, the one no one noticed until they needed something. I didn't hate her. Not yet. But I knew then she was playing a role written in my blood. I went home and opened an old notebook. One I used to carry in meetings, back before they all started treating me like furniture. I flipped through the notes, my ideas, my redesigns, my predictions. Half of them were already implemented. My handwriting stared back at me like a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore. Eager, meticulous, stupidly hopeful. I turned to a blank page, wrote 2 words in the center, start over. Then I stared at those words until the ink dried thick and glossy. It wasn't a revelation. More like a slow exhale I hadn't realized I was holding. I wouldn't ask for their help. Wouldn't ask for anything. If they thought I was nothing without the family name, they were about to see what I was made of, stripped to the bone. The next morning, I registered an LLC. I didn't have a name yet. Just a vision. I wanted to build something leaner, smarter, less corrupt. Something that wasn't beholden to old men with God complexes and inherited wealth. I knew the industry. I knew its weaknesses. And I knew exactly which clients were already sick of the inflated egos and recycled ideas my father-in-law peddled like they were gold. At night, while my wife slept, I built wireframes, business plans, a pitch deck with just enough venom to be sharp, but not enough to bleed. I sold the watch they gave me for my 10th work anniversary and used the money to rent a desk in a co-working space. It smelled like burnt coffee and dreams. I liked it. No legacy here. No expectations. Just strangers trying to make something out of nothing. I belonged more there in a week than I had in that office in a decade. The first few clients were tiny, local, skeptical, but I showed up, over-delivered, stayed up late fixing problems they didn't even know they had. I didn't wear a suit, didn't use buzzwords, just results. The kind that turned whispers into calls. The kind that made people ask, wait, wasn't he with? I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I let the mystery do the work. And the family? They didn't notice. Not yet. They thought I'd faded into irrelevance. That I was licking my wounds, maybe looking for a desk job or settling into quiet failure. I let them believe it. Let them talk about me like a cautionary tale. That's what happens when you don't evolve, they'd say. That's what happens when you're not cut for it. But I was learning something they'd never understand. When you're no longer trying to be accepted, no longer begging to be seen, you become dangerous. You become free. I wasn't vanishing. I was molting, shedding the soft parts they could discard. What was left would be sharper, hungrier, and it would have a name they'd one day choke on. The first scar came in the form of a bounced check. A client I trusted, a contract I didn't read closely enough, a payment that never cleared. It was 2 months into the launch, and I'd just used my last buffer dollar to keep the site running. The lights in the co-working space flickered above me like a bad omen. I sat there, jaw tight, staring at the screen while the word insufficient burned itself into my retinas. I didn't scream, didn't punch the desk, just stared. That's when I realized the old version of me, the company man, the agreeable in-law, the one who smiled when insulted, would have apologized, would have asked what he did wrong. But this me didn't flinch. This me made a list of every lesson hidden inside that humiliation and then stayed up all night rewriting the client contract template from scratch. Every mistake I made, I learned from like it owed me a debt. Every condescending no I got from investors, I documented. Patterns, tone shifts, excuses, I tracked them like weather patterns. I became obsessive in a way that would have made my old colleagues uncomfortable. But I wasn't building something to impress them. I wasn't looking for applause anymore. I was looking for something I'd never had in that family, leverage. And leverage, I learned, grows in the dark. Quietly, ruthlessly, patiently. By month 6, I still wasn't paying myself. I drove a rusted Civic with no ASC and kept protein bars in the glove box for meals. I showered at odd hours to avoid seeing my wife. She stopped asking about my little project after I snapped at her one night when she said I should maybe just consider asking her dad for advice. The silence after that wasn't angry, it was resigned. She looked at me like a stranger. And for once, I didn't feel like apologizing. If she couldn't see what I was building, then she didn't deserve to be there when it stood tall. I started wearing the same clothes every day. Gray t-shirt, black jeans, boots. Routine stripped of vanity. I wasn't trying to impress clients. I was trying to survive long enough to outgrow them. My calendar was filled with nothing but grit. Cold calls, pitch rewrites, analytics deep dives, error messages I had to Google just to pronounce. I became fluent in code, fluent in rejection, fluent in silence. There's a certain discipline that comes when no one is clapping. When every day feels like shouting into the void. It either hollows you out or hardens you. I didn't realize until later that I'd chosen the latter. One night, I collapsed. Not metaphorically. My body gave out at the bottom of the stairs. I woke up on the tile with my cheek against something sticky, spilled coffee, maybe. My wife found me and called me stubborn. Said I was killing myself for a dream no one asked me to chase. I told her I wasn't chasing anything. I was burying something. She didn't ask what. I think deep down, she knew. She just didn't want to hear it out loud. Didn't want to face the fact that the man she married wasn't trying to get back what he lost. He was trying to burn the old world to the ground and build a new one with his own hands. The breakthrough came in the form of a niche I'd once dismissed. Real estate analytics for private investors. A clunky, neglected segment with low competition and massive demand. I dove in headfirst, tailored a product so precisely it felt like a secret weapon. The first 3 clients multiplied into 12. By the end of the 9th month, I was profitable. Quietly, unspectacularly, but undeniably profitable. I paid myself for the first time in almost a year. Not much, just enough to stop feeling like I was failing in secret. I remember the taste of that meal. A real dinner, not microwaved or rationed. Steak, red wine, eaten alone in the corner of a quiet restaurant with my back to the wall. I chewed slowly. Let it sit on my tongue. It didn't taste like victory. It tasted like distance from the version of me who would have begged for scraps. I started turning down meetings with people who'd once laughed at me. Not rudely, just with that quiet kind of dismissal they'd shown me all those years. Sorry, not a fit. We're pursuing a different direction. Their replies always came fast, desperate, confused. I didn't respond. Let them sit with the silence I knew all too well. And little by little, word started to spread. There's a guy who used to work with the family firm. Real sharp. Off the radar. Builds real tools, not just talk. Clients started mentioning my name without realizing they were handing me the weapon I'd been forging in the dark. The scar tissue didn't just toughen me, it sharpened me. I no longer craved validation. I craved control. Control of my time, my decisions, my legacy. I stopped using the company mugs they gave me. Threw out the last photo of me in that family's boardroom. Replaced it with a black and white photo of a bridge being built. Half finished, cables exposed. Raw. That was me now. Still under construction, but already standing. And my father-in-law? Still hadn't called. Still hadn't acknowledged what I was building. I didn't expect him to. Not yet. He lived in a world of titles and family names, of status over substance. He hadn't noticed the shift. Hadn't seen the quiet migration of his former clients. The slow erosion of loyalty. The power vacuum forming around Rebecca, who, by now, was clearly in over her head. I knew it would reach him eventually. Knew that one day soon, someone would put my name in his ear, not as an employee, but as a competitor. Maybe even as the man who took what he built and rewrote it in silence. And when that day came, I didn't want to be ready. I wanted to be undeniable. It started with a missed call. A number I didn't recognize, no voicemail left. Then another, same area code, same silence. I ignored them. People reach out all the time now. I've become someone you chase when your numbers drop or your board gets nervous. I've learned not to answer too quickly. Silence is a tool, and I wield it like a scalpel. But the third time the number rang, I picked up, half curious, half bored. The voice on the other end was deeper than I remembered, slower, too. I think it's time we talk, my father-in-law said. No introduction. No small talk. Just those 7 words. They landed like a rusted nail in softwood. I didn't respond right away. Let the silence stretch until he filled it himself. I believe we may have mutual interests again. I knew the tone. That calculated calm, the one he used when he was cornered but refused to admit it. I'd seen it in board meetings, in negotiations, even in family fights when my wife's mother used to hold the moral high ground. It meant something was slipping. He wasn't calling to reconnect. He was calling because he had no one left to call. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I told him I was busy and hung up. Then I sat back in my chair and waited for the feeling I thought I'd have: a vindication, victory, something electric. But all I felt was stillness, like the eye of a storm. The invitation came 3 days later. A lunch meeting. Neutral territory. One of those mid-tier Italian places where everything smells faintly of basil and regret. I showed up 10 minutes late, on purpose. He was already seated, napkin folded neatly, phone face down. When he saw me, he smiled the way men do when they're pretending they didn't just bleed out a little on the walkover. He stood, offered a hand. I didn't take it. just sat down and nodded once. His mouth twitched, but he didn't flinch. "You look good," he said. "Focused." I said nothing. He cleared his throat, then leaned in like we were co-conspirators again. "I won't waste your time. The company's been shifting. Rebecca's done her best." But he trailed off, eyes scanning mine for sympathy, weakness, and opening. He found none. "I need someone who understands the infrastructure. The long game. Someone who—" "You fired that someone," I said, not loud but not soft either. "In this exact city. In a nicer restaurant." His face flushed, but only slightly. Years of power had taught him how to contain shame. He nodded once, like he'd rehearsed that moment in his head, and this was the version where he stayed composed. "That was a mistake," he said. "I see that now." I let him sit in that sentence for a moment, stew in the acid of those words. Not because I needed to hear them, but because he needed to say them. He launched into the pitch then. A strategic partnership. Equity options. Full control of operations. He dressed it up with numbers and projections, but underneath the buzzwords, it was a lifeboat. His company was bleeding. Clients were leaving. Their Q3 report was dismal. I knew all of this already. I'd made it my business to know. One of my current clients had poached 2 of their top managers after I restructured their backend. Another had called me just last week to thank me for fixing what they never could. And still, I let him talk. Let him throw rope across the table and pretend it was a ladder. When he finished, he leaned back like he'd done me a favor. "We'd be lucky to have you back in the family," he said. That's when I laughed. Not loud. Just enough. A single, hollow breath. "You think this is about family?" I asked. "You made it clear I was never really part of that." He looked down then. "Not guilty, strategic. You married my daughter. That makes you expendable." I cut in. "When it suited you." I stood. I wasn't angry. I was done. "I didn't come here to join anything," I said. "I came to watch you ask." Then I left, without touching my water, without looking back. Outside, the air was sharp and bright. I walked to my car slowly, breathing into clarity. He would go back inside and tell himself he handled it well, that he'd offered an olive branch, that maybe I'd come around. But deep down he knew. He'd just sat across from the man he'd underestimated, the one who'd taken exile and turned it into empire. And he knew. I'd never walk through that door again. The next week, his daughter, my wife, brought it up for the first time in months. "Dad said you were rude to him," she said, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. "He's trying, you know." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I realized how far apart we were standing. Not just physically, philosophically, existentially. "Trying now doesn't erase what he did," I said. "And pretending it never happened doesn't make you neutral." Her eyes flickered, then hardened. "Maybe you just can't let things go." And maybe she was right. But maybe letting go wasn't the goal. That night, I moved my things into the guest room. She didn't stop me. Just stood in the hallway like she was watching something inevitable take shape. We were both too tired to argue. But I knew then that the next phase of this wasn't about business. It was about identity. I wasn't just returning to the world they threw me out of. I was reclaiming every inch of it. On my terms. And I wasn't going to ask for permission. I walked into the building like I never left it. Not the same one. I would never step foot in that office again, but one just like it. Sterile and overpriced, with the same stone floors and fake smiling receptionist, the same hum of tired ambition in the air. Except this time, it was his building that was falling apart. His name on the wall meant less than the peeling paint near the elevators. I came alone, no entourage, no briefcase. Just my presence, which by now carried more weight than the company ever did. The secretary didn't recognize me. That felt appropriate. It was easier to move when no one saw you coming. He stood when I entered the boardroom. 3 others were already seated, all familiar, one former VP, one legal rep, one man I didn't recognize but knew from posture alone was a consultant brought in too late. They had coffees in front of them, untouched. No one smiled. He gestured to the chair across from him like we were equals. I sat slowly, not because I was cautious, but because silence stretched time, and time made people nervous. He opened with pleasantries. Asked about my company. I answered in numbers, not words. Growth rate, client retention, market share. I watched the consultant write it all down like it was a threat assessment. "We've had a rough quarter," he finally said, voice tight. Rebecca's been overwhelmed. We underestimated how quickly certain client accounts could destabilize. Translation: the house you build is caving in, and the heir we chose doesn't know where the exits are. He didn't say it outright, but his tone did. There's a gap now, he continued. One we believe you're uniquely qualified to fill. We'd be open to discussing partnership terms. Partnership. He said it like it meant something. Like I hadn't already surpassed them in reach, in innovation, in relevance. I stared at him for a long time, then turned to the VP. You're down 22% in client revenue since last year. You lost the Lennox account 2 months ago. You just don't know it yet. He blinked. The legal rep shifted in his chair. My father-in-law didn't respond. I wasn't there to impress them. I was there to make them remember who they erased. What exactly are you looking for? The consultant asked. He had a crisp accent, probably British, probably paid by the hour. I turned to him. I'm not looking for anything, I said. You asked me here. You need something. I already built what I need. He opened his mouth, then closed it. They weren't used to someone walking into this room without needing their approval. It confused them. It threatened them. And that was the point. My father-in-law cleared his throat. We've always valued your perspective, he said, and that's when I laughed. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just enough to cut the air like glass. You valued obedience, I said. You valued silence. I gave you both. And when I finally asked for recognition, you called me unfit. The VP looked down. The legal guy scribbled something. The consultant leaned back like this was better than TV. I made mistakes, he said, and the words came out stiffer than he intended. Like a man trying to remember what humility sounds like. You thought I'd crawl back, I said. Thought I'd fail. Thought replacing me with someone who shared your blood was smarter than keeping the one person who actually bled for this company. I stood. No rush. Just finality. You want my help? I asked. You want to survive? He nodded, a fraction too fast. Then sell it to me. He blinked. Excuse me. The table froze. Sell me the company. I repeated. Not a partnership. Not a role. The whole damn thing. Majority stake. Full control. You walk away. Rebecca walks away. And I turn this thing into something worth saving. His face drained. That's not what we. Then this meeting is over. I turned. Took 3 steps toward the door. Wait. His voice cracked a little. That's not a conversation we can have without the board. I turned back. Then have it. Because the offer expires in 48 hours. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I gave them a nod, small, final. You have my number, I said. And my silence is more expensive now. I left them there. A room full of men choking on their own relevance. The receptionist looked up again as I passed. Still didn't recognize me. That was fine. Let them remember in whispers. Let the legend build in the absence of explanation. Outside, the sky had darkened without me noticing. Spring thunderclouds gathered like a warning. I stood under it all, feeling the air pressed down. This wasn't revenge. Not really. This was reclamation. I wasn't taking back what was mine. I was showing them what they lost, making them feel the weight of a decision they thought would go unnoticed. And if they couldn't sell, if pride or board politics got in the way, that was fine, too. Because I already had their clients. Already had their market. The company was a carcass. I was just offering to buy the bones so they didn't have to watch them rot. They didn't call within 48 hours. That was the first mistake. I knew they'd hesitate. Pride doesn't die easy, especially in men who've never had to swallow it. On the 3rd day, my inbox lit up, an email from the board, stiff and clinical, requesting an exploratory dialogue regarding acquisition terms. No apology, no acknowledgement of the insult they'd made of my ears. I replied with one line, my offer remains unchanged. Your timeline does not. Within minutes, they called. I let it ring 4 times before answering. That was the first shift in gravity, when they realized I was no longer orbiting their approval. The next week was a quiet war. Lawyers, accountants, consultants. They tried to soften the deal, chip away at the control clause, delay the equity transfer. I said nothing. My legal team, sharper than theirs and twice as fast, sliced through every tactic. I watched from a distance, detached but vigilant, like a surgeon observing a body being cut open. They bled concessions with every meeting. By the end of the 2nd week, they stopped using the phrase strategic partnership entirely. That was when I knew they'd lost the boardroom. All that remained was the illusion of negotiation. Rebecca never reached out. Not once. I don't know if it was shame or defiance, but either way, her silence confirmed what I suspected. She knew she was done. The last photo she posted from the office was a smiling shot in front of a whiteboard. The caption read, "Building something big." 2 days later, she was gone from the company's site. No statement. No farewell post. She just vanished, like she'd never been there at all. That's how they do it in that world. Quiet exits for the well-connected. No one questions the fall of the golden child. They just politely avert their eyes. The final papers were signed in a glass tower downtown. Not the boardroom I was fired in, not the restaurant he tried to win me back in. This place had no history, no ghosts. I picked it for that reason. Clean. Neutral. The kind of space where new stories begin. My father-in-law showed up late, of course. Not because of traffic, but because men like him believe time belongs to them. He wore the same suit he fired me in. I noticed the fray on the cuff, the slight sag at the shoulders. It didn't fit the way it used to. Neither did the role he was playing. He didn't speak during the signing. Not much. Just nodded when prompted, signed where he was told. His hand trembled once. I didn't mention it. When it was done, the lawyers closed their folders and began the polite shuffle of handshakes and exits. He stayed seated. I waited. There was no one left to perform for. "I built that company," he said finally. His voice wasn't bitter, just tired. "From nothing." I nodded. "Then you handed it to someone who didn't understand how to keep it alive." He looked away. "And now it's yours." I didn't answer. We both knew that wasn't the point. He didn't say goodbye. Just stood, straightened his jacket like it still held weight, and walked out the door. I never saw him again. The first thing I did as owner was strip the family name from the letterhead. Rebranded the firm under a single word, Rook. Not after a bird. After the chess piece. Straight lines. Silent strength. The ability to change everything when no one sees it coming. My clients loved it. The staff, what remained of them, adjusted quickly. Those who didn't were quietly let go. No announcements. No public blood. Just silence and forward motion. I walked through the office the first Monday morning after the takeover. The halls felt colder, more honest. Gone were the framed photos of my father-in-law shaking hands with politicians, the plaques celebrating family legacy. In their place, white walls. Empty. Waiting. I passed the break room where I once overheard Rebecca call me harmless. Past the corner office where I'd been told I wasn't cut for the job. It was mine now. I didn't move into it. I left it empty. As a reminder, some things aren't worth inheriting. My wife didn't mention the sale. She must have heard. The whole family would have known. But she said nothing. The night I came home after the signing, she was already asleep. Or pretending to be. I stood in the doorway of the guest room for a long time, looking at the outline of her under the sheets. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything. Just a kind of cold stillness, like the room had been cryogenically sealed. We hadn't touched in months. Hadn't fought, either. Just drifted until neither of us could name what we were anymore. 2 weeks later, she packed a bag. Said she was going to her mother's for a while. She didn't ask me to stop her. I didn't ask when she'd be back. We both understood. Some things rot from the inside until they collapse without noise. All that's left is the space they leave behind. I sat in the kitchen that night with a glass of water and nothing else. The house was quiet. No ticking clock. No hum of another person's presence. Just stillness. I looked at the calendar on the fridge. The last thing written was a dentist appointment from 3 months ago. I took it down. Threw it away. Then I opened my laptop and wrote a letter. To my staff. Short. Direct. Grateful. And beneath it, I attached a photo. Not of me. Of the office wall. Blank. Waiting for something new. Fallout doesn't always explode. Sometimes it lands gently, coats everything in dust, and waits for you to decide what's worth cleaning up. It was Rebecca who unraveled first. I heard it from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, one of the old account managers, now working at a mid-sized competitor. She messaged me late at night, a single line. "Did you see what she posted?" I hadn't. I hadn't looked at her in months, not since she disappeared from the company roster like a typo. But I clicked the link. A story, shaky and breathless. Black screen, white text. Some people will step on your neck for a promotion and call it strategy. Don't let their silence make you think they're strong. They're just scared you'll talk. Then it vanished, deleted within minutes. But not before the internet did what it always does: screenshots, shares, whispers that spread like rot under a floorboard. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. It was the first public crack in the family armor. A signal flare, whether she meant it to be or not. People started messaging me. Former employees. Clients who'd left them for me. Even a journalist who remembered the old firm's rise and wanted to write about its fall. I said no. Not because I cared about protecting them, but because some stories lose their power when told too early. I wanted the dust to settle. I wanted people to feel the silence before they heard the truth. My father-in-law went next. He tried to pivot, of course. Made a few public appearances. Talked about mentorship, legacy, how proud he was of the new generation. But the eyes watching him weren't impressed anymore. They saw what he had become, an echo of past success, untethered from the present. His authority had been transferred, paper by paper, clause by clause. Legally, he was a non-entity. But ego doesn't vanish with a signature. It lingers. And in his case, it rotted. A week after the acquisition, he started calling mutual connections. Not for help, just for relevance. "How's the transition?" he'd ask, as if he were still involved. Some humored him. Most didn't. I heard about it from 3 separate sources before he finally reached out again. A text this time. "I think we should meet. Just talk." I never responded. There's nothing left to say when the person who taught you silence is finally drowning in it. But it wasn't just them. The unraveling was wider. My wife's mother, once the quiet matriarch, the glue behind closed doors, filed for divorce. I found out through a mutual friend who ran into her at a wine bar downtown, laughing like she hadn't in decades. She looked 10 years younger, he said. Like someone just cut the weight off her shoulders. I didn't blame her. People think the loud ones hold the power. But sometimes it's the silent ones who know exactly when to leave. My wife never came back. She emailed about some mail she needed forwarded. That was all. No questions, no apologies. I boxed up her things and left them at her mother's place. The woman who opened the door barely resembled the person I used to know. She looked lighter, wiser. "You were right," she said as I handed her the boxes. I didn't ask about what. We both knew. Some truths live in the space between sentences. Back at the office, things accelerated. Clients poured in, referrals, cold leads turned warm, even old accounts that once belonged to the firm I now owned. Every contract signed felt like a quiet vindication. I didn't celebrate, just adjusted systems, hired smart, kept the momentum clean and efficient. My staff learned quickly that I didn't care about hierarchy or tradition. I cared about results. And respect. The kind earned, not inherited. But even as the numbers climbed and the noise outside grew louder, inside me something shifted. I couldn't sleep through the night. I'd wake at 3 a.m. to silence so thick it felt like punishment. I'd sit in the kitchen with a mug I never drank from, staring at the blinking light on the oven. One night, I opened the drawer with the old company mug, the one they gave me at year 10. I held it for a long time. Then I dropped it in the trash. It didn't shatter, just thudded soft and final, like a memory folding itself closed. It wasn't grief I felt. It was something more elusive. Emptiness dressed in accomplishment. The truth was, I'd won. I had the company, the clients, the respect. I'd dismantled their myth from the inside out. But revenge, once complete, has no aftertaste. No sweetness. Just silence. And in that silence, you have to ask yourself, what now? I started walking at night again. Not to vanish, like before, but to remember. To feel the ground under my feet. No headphones. No destination. Just the city breathing around me. On one walk, I passed the old office building, the one where I was fired. Lights off. Lease sign in the window. I stood there for a while, staring at the empty lobby where they once told me I wasn't cut for the job. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel rage. Just distance. Like watching a play I'd once performed in and now couldn't remember my lines. The past wasn't a fire anymore. It was just ash. Cold. Settled. And beneath it, something new. Not rebirth. Not yet. But the hint of space. The suggestion that something else could begin now that the storm had passed and taken all the illusions with it. I didn't know I was done until I walked past a mirror and didn't flinch. It was a Tuesday, quiet, colorless, forgettable in every way except that it held no tension in my chest, no weight behind my eyes. I caught my reflection by accident, a half-second glance in the hallway at the office. And there I was, standing straight, not waiting for impact, not braced for someone to question why I was in the room. Just present, alive, unbothered. I kept walking, but something clicked in that second. I realized I wasn't carrying them anymore. Not the guilt, not the shame, not even the need to win. That part of the story had ended, and what remained was mine to define. The office was different now. Not just the name, not just the people, though both had changed. It felt different. There was an ease in the air, a quiet current that came from people who knew why they were here and didn't need to fight for it. I'd built a culture out of everything I had once been denied: autonomy, dignity, clarity. No one here performed strength. They simply were strong in the ways that mattered. I no longer needed to remind anyone who I was. And in the absence of proving, I finally felt peace. I spent more time in the city again. Not just walking at night, but sitting in places I used to avoid. Coffee shops full of strangers. Libraries. Galleries. I watched people move, watched the patterns they made, those little private rituals that hold a person together. I remembered how I used to observe like this when I was young, before ambition swallowed me whole. Back then, I thought power was something you earned from others. Now I knew the truth. The real kind lives in your ability to leave the room and not wonder what's being said about you. One morning, I got a letter. Not an email, a real letter. Handwritten. The envelope was cream-colored and slightly creased, like it had been carried too long before sending. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Rebecca. I stared at it for a while before opening. Inside, one sentence. He still thinks you owe him something. That was it. No signature. No context. Just that single line, like a match left on a dry forest floor. I tore the letter in half and threw it away without reading it twice. I didn't need her to tell me what I already knew. He would never understand. He would go to his grave believing I'd taken something from him. Let him. Some debts are imaginary. Some are inherited. And some are burned quietly, without explanation. A few weeks later, I sold the house. The one we lived in. The one with the guest room I moved into when my wife stopped looking at me like someone she could trust. I didn't make a speech about it. Just hired movers, boxed my life, and let the walls echo for the first time in years. There was a photo we kept on the bookshelf, a vacation in Florence, us smiling on a rooftop. I left it behind, face down. I figured if she ever came back, she could decide what to do with it. I never looked back when I closed the door. I bought a small apartment near the water. Nothing dramatic. Clean walls. Tall windows. The kind of place where you can hear your own thoughts without them bouncing off someone else's regret. I filled it slowly. No rush. No performance. A couch I liked. A table that fit. No monogram towels, no framed degrees. Just things that worked. Things that didn't need to be proven beautiful to be worth keeping. And for the first time, I started sleeping through the night again. I kept the company, of course. But I stepped back from the front lines. Let the team run things. Hired people better than me at the parts one used to cling to out of fear. Delegation wasn't surrender, it was trust. The real kind. The kind I never got, and now gave freely, precisely because I understood what it meant to earn it. The firm grew faster without me micromanaging. Funny how that works. I still made the decisions that mattered. But I stopped needing to touch everything. The hunger I once had, the kind built on resentment and silence, it had done its job. Now, I fed something else: stability, clarity, time. Sometimes, I'd walk into meetings and people would look at me like a ghost, someone they'd heard about but never seen. They'd ask for the story. How did it happen? How'd you end up with their company? I never gave them the full answer. Just smiled and said, they forgot what I was worth. That was enough. There were moments I thought about reaching out to my wife. Brief ones. Late at night, in the space between memory and sleep. But every time, the feeling passed. Not because I hated her, but because I knew that chapter had closed. Some doors don't need slamming. Some just stay shut. Closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes when you stop needing to be understood by the people who refuse to see you. It comes in the small rituals, the quiet coffee, the turned-down bed, the untouched phone at dinner. It comes in the mornings when you wake up and no longer rehearse arguments in your head. It comes when you realize you're free. If you've ever been underestimated, replaced, or quietly erased, this story was for you. Subscribe for more slow burn revenge arcs that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. Leave a comment if you've ever come back stronger. See you soon in our next story.